Tell us what happened on Tuesday, the 11th of November, 2019, between the hours of 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., sir. The interrogator asked in a rather harsh but somehow polite tone. I strained to recall the events that transpired that night. Floods of vaguely savage memories engulfed my mind as I began to splutter out the best description I could. I wanted that man to pay, and as for that poor girl, she needed justice. I did too. It all started on a Tuesday night. I was working an overtime shift at my local pizza place downtown. I thought it'd be a great idea to hopefully earn some money to pay for rent after losing my previous job just weeks before. I had just turned 25 at the time too, so if I could work hard for a few years, then maybe I would be able to afford uni and truly start my life. But that night, whilst fathoming the future I had ahead of me, I received a call, so I picked up the phone. Giorgino's Pizza? What can I get for you? I answered the phone with an air of customer service, but on the other end, all I could hear was breathing, panicked breathing. Hello? A man's voice suddenly shot out from the phone. It had made me jolt in my chair, but I regained focus immediately and answered. Hi there, sir. What can I get for you? I said, hoping for a small order because of how late it was that night. I would like to place an order for delivery. One small pizza. I'll pay at the door. The phone slammed, and the line was cut. The guy's rude, demanding tone had marginally infuriated me, but I entered the order into the system, waited around 15 minutes for it to be made, got in my car, and drove to the address. I arrived just 4 minutes into the journey and walked up to a small apartment block, looked for the number 13 apartment, and dialed for entry.
Hello? Who is this?
A surprised voice blurted out. It's your pizza delivery, sir. My words were rather restrained as I held back a volley of insults and shouts that were lodged in the back of my brain.
Bring it up.
His voice tone changed to a stern, mildly commanding one, and I was buzzed in. Making my way up the steps, I looked around. I had noticed there weren't any cameras, which I thought was odd for an apartment block. Eventually, I made it to the door, knocked 3 times, and the door shot open. My jaw dropped at the sight of the person. He had a bloody knife in his hand, with his face covered in guts and dismembered flesh. I assumed he was the same person who made the call. Get inside now, or I'll slit your throat and throw you off the balcony. His voice remained stern, but that same background of panic could be noticed lurking in the back of his throat. I walked in, his knife trailing behind me as I set down the pizza and rose my hands, presenting my lack of weapons or danger, hoping he would release me. I could feel my blood curdling as I saw, over in the corner, a girl, tattered, beaten, drenched in what I could only think was her own blood and gored flesh. I looked back at the man. He stood still there, even started to grin. He must have been a psychopath, or had a bad fight with his girlfriend or something. What do you want from me? I hastily asked as he began to walk towards me. You made a mistake tonight. You killed my girlfriend. You even tried to kill me, but I survived by killing you in self-defense. Now you're gonna take the fall for me. You're going to die. His words stunned me. He was going to use me to cover up his murder. I couldn't let him do that. He charged at me as I lowered my hands into a fighting stance, and instantly we collided. His first attempt to drive the knife into my skull, but I slapped his hands away and kicked him onto the floor. A loud crash came from the fall, but I swiftly grabbed a nearby lamp and lobbed it at him whilst he was on the ground. He screeched in agony as it shattered against him. Whilst he rolled on the floor, still shrieking and in pain, I threw myself on top of him, grabbing him by the throat, and for around 15 seconds, I held him there as he struggled to breathe. It was futile. He died shortly after. After I ended him, protecting myself and this girl's justice, I grabbed a landline, and that's when I dialed for the police to come moments later. That'll be all. Thank you, the interrogator muttered. I sat back in my chair, feeling rather relieved, when all of a sudden, the door to the interrogation room flung open, and 2 men dressed in dark gray suits came in. "This is the guy," the initial interrogator claimed. Rather surprised, I sat right back up in my chair, baffled by this sudden appearance of 2 detectives. "Sir, as of today, you are under arrest for a double homicide, breaking and entering, as well as withholding evidence from the police." Their words stung me with arrows of 1,000 steel lightning bolts. What? But how? I could barely muster the ability to speak as they sat down. "During the recollection of events, combined with some extra evidence we found exterior to this interrogation, we have discovered your scheme, Mr. Davis." The second detective then pulled out a set of files and a recording of the interrogation. I stared blankly at the files, the pictures, the documents, and my mouth gaped as I listened back to the specific parts of the recording that identified that I was in fact the killer. The first thing we noticed was that you needed more money to pay rent. After looking at your bank statements, they showed you already paid for your rent, and in fact, you could pay for another 7 months. That led us to checking whether you were on a paid shift when you told us you were. Your boss said he doesn't allow overtime. That made us curious as to how you got the pizza and found your victim's home, as you never stated that they even told you what their address was. This meant that you had brought a spare pizza box, which we now have discovered you stored a knife in. You located their address by going through data files from the pizza place, and you said you only checked for cameras because you wanted there to be none. Once you got in the apartment, you sliced up the girl, and the man walked in. You pelted a lamp to the back of his head, then choked him to death while he was unconscious. You then laid the knife in his hand, covering it in his fingerprints, and argued yours were only there because you slapped it out of his hands. Once the murder was complete, you then dialed the police and prepared yourself to create a story. Great planning, I must say. The only problem we have is why you seemingly randomly chose 2 people, murdered them, then tried to frame the man for the whole thing. I couldn't move. I sat there, my jaw feeling almost detached from my mouth, purely from the shock of how quickly they caught me out. This wasn't supposed to go this way. I had planned for so long, so thoroughly, and I got caught. "He stole something from me," I managed to utter from the very deepest elements of my soul. "What did he steal from you? Why does that mean the girl had to die too?" Their questioning tortured me. I felt so trapped. "We dated once, me and her, but she cheated on me. Got with him. They both disgusted me. I did what needed to be done." Their faces sunk at my words. "That's all. Time to come with us, Mr. Davis." They then proceeded to cuff me, and we headed for the jail cell. It's been around 4 years since then. I received a life sentence in prison for what I did. Every day I struggled to believe they caught me, so quickly as well. Yet I feel no regret, no remorse for what I did. They deserved punishment, and to them, I was the judge. Although I may rot in here to the day I cease to breathe, I will forever remember the look on her face as I drove the knife deep into her soft flesh and the sound of the last breath exhaling from her mouth. I loved it. My name is Greg, and I'm 22 years old. I study law at university, and until a couple of years, I was still living with my parents, so I was able to dedicate myself to my studies full-time. Unfortunately, there were some personal issues between me and my father, and I decided to leave home. Of course, this meant I had to find my own place, and since I didn't inherit any kind of fortune, I was also in need of a job. This was going to be tough, but on the other hand, being the optimistic guy that I am, I also thought it could be a wake-up call and an opportunity for me to grow and to become stronger. I found a small apartment, and my mother insisted on paying the rent for the first couple of months, and I agreed, because it was just about a reasonable time for me to find work. I eventually got a job as a pizza delivery man. I was working the night shift, which was better for me. First, the payment was more appealing, and then I was able to go to classes during the day. Being young is very useful when you have to deal with such aggressive and demanding time schedules. But still, coffee and energy drinks became an important part of my life, I have to admit. The work itself, for the most part, was fine. Most people were nice. Now and then I'd get the occasional tip. Of course, eventually I had to deal with some sketchy personalities, and I also had to drive to some sinister places during dark hours. But I knew it was part of the deal. That's just life. We can't live in a bubble, right? One night, I was called to deliver a pizza to a fancy, exclusive neighborhood. Big, nice houses with plush outside properties, gardens, even pools here and there. I guess rich people enjoy their occasional, regular pizza now and then. I rang the doorbell. I realized someone was watching from a window, so the door was immediately opened. Good evening, small vegetarian pizza, right? That's right. A beautiful woman, probably in her early 30s, answered. Short, dark hair, big blue eyes, and a big expressive smile that was shining under the street lamp lights. She was wearing a Metallica t-shirt and black jeans. I could listen to heavy metal music being played in her house. That'll be $14.95, please, I said, trying my best not to stare at her. Here's 20. You can keep the change, she said, smiling. Thank you, miss. I appreciate it, I replied, gratefully. Miss, I'm Laura, she said surprisingly, introducing herself. I'm Greg, I answered. Well, hello, Greg. You're new to the job, right? You're probably new at any job. You seem a little bit insecure. Don't be. Yes, I have to admit that I am. Well, keep up the good work. You arrived in time, you're polite, your hands aren't sweaty, and you don't smell bad. All wins. Laura laughed. I laughed too. Well, I wish you a good night, Laura. Same to you, Greg. We parted ways. I went back to my motorcycle. Laura probably went back inside to enjoy her pizza. I was happy for a brief moment. A small, even if circumstantial conversation with an attractive woman in which I'm paid a compliment was always welcome. A week later, I was once again summoned to deliver a vegetarian pizza to Laura. It's not unusual when you're working the same shift and regular customers place their orders the same time of day and week. At this occasion, it wasn't indifferent to the situation, and I was happy. Hey, Greg, so we meet again. Hey, Laura, so it seems. Nice to see you, I said, as Laura picked up her pizza. Listen, I'm very straightforward, and I trust my first impressions. When it comes to people, I like you, Greg. You seem to be a gentle and genuine young man. Do you want to meet up at some place and have a few beers? When's your next day off or night off? Laura asked me. I would love that. I think you're pretty cool as well. How about next Saturday night? I said. not believing my luck. That will do. We can meet up here at my house, and then I'll drive us both to a nice rock bar. You're gonna love it. Great. 9 p.m., is that fine? 9 it is. I'll see you next Saturday then. Bye, Greg. Take care. Bye, Laura. Enjoy your pizza. I guess the universe was looking out for me and rewarding me for being such a hardworking guy. A date with a beautiful and rich woman who lived in a mansion. Things are paying off. This is what I was thinking when I returned to my small apartment that night. After so many months, that night, I slept like a baby. The next Saturday, I was, once again, waiting for Laura to come out of her big white house. But this time, I wasn't delivering pizza. Laura was wearing a black dress and looked stunning. I was all dressed in black as well, for the occasion, so to speak. Laura drove us in her Mercedes to the bar that she was talking about. Rock Creek was the name of the bar, and it was awesome. I really liked it. Lots of metalheads, punks, and bikers. The music was heavy and dark, obviously, but the place and the people were fun and friendly. Me and Laura sat by the bar. I soon realized that she was a regular customer. We found out through conversation that we had lots in common, including her sense of humor and down-to-earth personality. It was late night, around 4 a.m., when Laura drove us back to her place. I was going to say goodbye to her and ride back home on my humble motorcycle, but Laura kissed me and invited me to stay. And I was very glad to accept both her kiss and invitation. I finally entered Laura's house. She told me her parents were filthy rich, and so she didn't have to work. That mansion belonged to her parents, but they had plenty of houses and lived somewhere else. Once Laura switched on the lights of her living room, I screamed. There were wild animals inside. Laura laughed. The animals were dead. It was creepy, though. There was a fox, a bear. Their corpses were conserved in order to appear alive. Taxidermy is an art, Greg. I know many people find it morbid, but I think it's a way to keep these wonderful creatures alive, or at least to remember them and see how majestic they were. Well, I guess it's a matter of taste, I thought to myself, trying to avoid looking into the menacing yet dead eyes of the bear. We had a final drink sitting on her couch and proceeded to the bedroom. Fortunately, Laura's bedroom didn't have any more corpses waiting for me, and after seeing Laura naked, I completely forgot about Mr. Dead Bear and Mr. Dead Fox. In a few minutes, Laura and I were making wild and passionate love. In the heat of passion, I didn't even realize that Laura had something in her hand, and the white sheets were now turning red. Laura was cutting me with sharp scissors, small cuts, which were nevertheless making me bleed. Bleed for me, baby. Bleed. Oh, come on. I'll stop when you faint. It's awesome, Greg. It's awesome. Just embrace the kiss of death. Oh, I love death. It's so calming and exciting at the same time, Laura said with her big blue eyes opened wide, revealing pure insanity. Terrified, I pushed Laura away from me. She was actually laughing, hysterically, and licking my blood that was all around her face and body. This at least gave me time to pick up my clothes and run out of her house. I dressed up outside on the street. Fortunately, it was so late and so dark, I thought no one was watching me. But I was wrong. I saw Laura looking up at me with a wicked smile from her bedroom window. I was still bleeding, but I rode back home as fast as I could. I decided not to press charges against her. I don't know if it was the right thing to do. Who knows what that rich psychopath of a bitch had done in the past, or will do in the future. I just wanted to get away from her, for good. The next day, I quit my job as a pizza delivery man. I apologized to my father and returned home.
It was already late. Normally, I would have been at home, probably getting ready to go to sleep, but I had volunteered for an extra shift at work. Not that I really liked the job or anything, I just needed the extra money. If things went well, I'd be quitting by the end of the month. The streets were mostly empty at this time, which was good because I didn't really want to be held up by traffic. Most people don't actually take advantage of the free pizza after 30 minutes rule, but some a-holes did. And this particular customer seemed like one. The jerk ordered a pizza from way across town. Normally, it would take about 40 minutes to reach him. I raced through town on my scooter, making turns I wouldn't normally do during the day or during traffic. I still had about 10 minutes left when I was nearing the customer's house and couldn't keep myself from smirking. I wondered, hoping to see the shock on the guy's face when I showed up at his door with 5 minutes to spare. His building was a tall apartment, and I realized I'd have to run all the way to the 9th floor where he lived. The building definitely didn't look like it had elevators, and if it did, they would definitely be out of commission. I parked my scooter by the gate and ran straight into the building. I ran towards the elevator and pressed the button and waited for a few seconds, but nothing happened. Stairs. The night clerk said something from behind the magazine he was reading. "Damn," I said, turning around and running up the first stairwell I saw. I ran up, noticing the floor number written boldly on the wall. I kept up my pace and didn't stop till I saw 9 written in bold on the wall. I knocked on the door and caught my breath, with almost 4 minutes to spare. There was no response, so I knocked again, still breathing hard. "Just a minute," a calm voice called from the inside. "Yes?" he asked. "Someone ordered a pizza?" I was already getting irritated. "Oh, sorry," he apologized. It still took him nearly 2 minutes before he came to the door. I heard the lock jiggle, and the door swung open for a little bit to reveal a friendly-looking man. He handed me a $20 bill and told me to keep the change. My eyes widened at the tip, and I quickly handed him the pizza. He tried to pass it through the barely open door, but dropped it before it could pass through. His reflexes were fast, and he caught it before it hit the ground, but the door was able to swing open halfway before he also caught it with his leg. The door had opened just enough for me to see the dead body of a blonde lady on the floor of his apartment. The big steak knife he had used to kill her was still in her body, and her lifeless eyes were open and staring blindly. My blood ran cold when I realized what I had just walked into. I immediately shifted my gaze and pretended like I'd not seen it. He looked at my face intently as if he was searching for clues to make him certain I had not seen it. I turned around and was about to head out of the apartment. I wasn't even planning on stopping to call the police until I was safely back at the pizza shop. "Sorry, I didn't mean for you to see that," he apologized from behind. "See what?" I asked, turning, determined to play the role of the ignorant till I was safely away. "I would have let you live." He said it in a voice that genuinely sounded sorry. I knew the farce was up and took off running, screaming for help and banging on the other doors as I ran towards the stairwell. No one heard or bothered to check what was going on. "Get back here, bitch!" He growled through clenched teeth and launched himself at me. He knocked me off the ground, and we both rolled down the concrete step, but he managed to break my fall all the way down. I stood up before him, and he grabbed hold of my ankle. Without thinking, I whipped around and kicked him in the face with my free foot. My foot connected well with his jaw, and his grip loosened, and I continued running down the remaining stairs. "Help!" I shouted as I reached the ground floor, hoping that the night clerk would intervene, but he was nowhere to be seen. I didn't bother checking and ran straight through the door and hopped onto my scooter. The engine came to life on the first try, and I zoomed out of the area. The streets were totally empty now, and I began to regret it. My fear had barely subsided when a pair of headlights illuminated the street, and I caught the roar of an engine. I looked back, dreading what I might see, and saw the man from the apartment gaining on me. He was on a motorcycle, and it was fast approaching. I pushed the scooter to its limits and continued to race down the deserted streets. But my scooter was barely a match for the power of a motorcycle and a bloodthirsty man. I began to make dangerous turns in an attempt to shake him off and put as much distance as possible between us. He managed to keep up, and I turned to see him stretching out a hand to touch me. In his hand, a long knife was gleaming in the streetlights. I didn't really know how much more of it my scooter could take. Soon it would be overheating, and I had to get away before then. I made one last sudden turn and lost control of the scooter and found myself rolling on the road, skinning my arms. I heard a crash behind me and noticed he had fallen off his bike as well. I ignored the burning pain in my arms and face and stood up, running again. I had barely gone a few feet when a force grabbed my jacket and pulled me back. He had caught up with me. I skipped my arms through and allowed the jacket to go free, but he caught one of my arms as it slipped through. I swung around with my free hand and scratched his face. He let go of my other hand and I swung it also, nails first. I gasped in pain as I felt his knife tear into my hand. I pulled out my hairpin, letting my hair drop, and jabbed him in his side. He grunted and pushed me away from him. I landed on the floor and was blinded by a pair of headlights as a car came barreling through, knocking the man a few feet in the air. He flew a little distance and landed with a sickening sound on the ground. The driver came out of the car and approached me. "Are you okay? I saw him chasing you," he said. "I saw him kill someone, and now he wants to kill me," I said, panting. "My God, you're bleeding," he said, and he brought out his phone and called the police. I only ended up with a few burns and scrapes and a couple of stitches. The man survived and was arrested. He turned out to be an up-and-coming serial killer and would have made me his 8th victim that night. I didn't wait till the end of the month to quit. I stopped working that night and rarely even eat pizza anymore.
My name is Nadia, and I'm 26 years old. Until recently, I used to work at a Subway restaurant. It wasn't the most fascinating or well-paying job in the world, but in general, I was enjoying it enough. Except during those hours in which there were too many customers. But there were other surprises waiting for me as a Subway employee, and they were far from being boring. On one occasion, during a very rainy and stormy Wednesday afternoon, there were just a few people present. Besides me and 2 coworkers, there were 6 other customers. One of them was a very kind woman who just gave me a generous tip. Too generous, actually. $20. I was surprised, but she just said, "Oh, I'm having a very good week, and the day promises to be even better. I like to repay back the world, to the universe, whatever it feels right. And today, dear, the universe is you. And that's just how it works. The circle of life." It was quite an eccentric statement, but I always liked original people. I'm not even everyone needs to be normal kind of person myself. The woman had big green eyes and dark blonde hair turning gray. She was maybe around 50 years old and was wearing black jeans and a dark blue sweater. It was November, so it was cold enough. The woman waved at me one more time before she left the store, well equipped with her white umbrella to protect her from the rain. Eventually, my shift came to an end, and it was now 8 p.m. I left the store, and it was still raining, and was quite windy as well. I didn't have an umbrella, unlike the tip lady, but I had parked my car in a small street nearby. It was a relatively hidden street that only the locals knew about. Plus, I had a decent raincoat. So after a couple minutes of a walk, I was finally in front of my car, struggling to open the driver's door under such annoying rain, until I felt something pierce my neck. I couldn't feel my legs, and slowly let myself fall to the ground while the rain was falling onto me. My vision became completely blurry, and I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was in a big room. Everything around me was white. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. In fact, I wasn't wearing my own clothes anymore. Instead, someone dressed me in a white robe of a soft fabric. I was laying on a bed. Slowly recapturing my senses and trying to remember what happened, which wasn't much, I got out of bed. The floor was warm enough, even though I didn't have socks or shoes with me. Not all of the walls were white, though. In front of me, there was a gigantic glass. I approached it and tried to see through it. There was a small room with a couple of chairs inside, but no one was there, at least for the moment. Near the bed, there was a table with a bottle of water. I was actually very thirsty, but I didn't want to drink it because I had no idea what kind of substance was in there for me to take. Obviously, I had been kidnapped, and that's not the best way to start a friendship. Nervous, waiting for something to happen, even without thinking, I tried to grab my long hair as a subconscious way to relax, only to realize my hair had been completely shaved. I tried to see some kind of reflection of my face in the big glass window as my hands were still, hopelessly spreading themselves through my head, feeling my new naked texture. And finally, I started to scream. Hey, what's happening? What do you want from me? Someone, please. Someone talk to me. At this point, I just wanted to know what kind of mad scenario I'd been brought to. After a few minutes, a person did appear on the other side of the glass window. I was surprised to see it was a young girl. With a sad smile on her face, her head was also shaved, and she was dressed in a white robe, just like mine. Hello? Who are you? My name is Nadia, I said to her. Hello, Nadia. I am Alice. She answered, looking at me with her small blue eyes. She appeared to be sick. Even through the glass, I could see Alice was very pale and weak. How old are you? I'm 18. What kind of place is this? What are you doing here? What are we doing here? I asked, trying my best to keep calm to avoid scaring her away, for both our sakes. This is my mother's personal laboratory. She was the one who brought you here. I'm very sorry, she answered, turning her eyes to the floor, as if she was embarrassed. What? What for? I asked, now raising my voice, unable to keep myself together, immersed in panic. I'm very sick, and I need a new kidney. My mother ran some tests on your blood. You seem to be quite healthy. So my mother is going to take one of your kidneys and put it in me. She says you won't feel a thing, the girl said, clearly ashamed. Once again, everything around me started to spin. It was as if the horrible white room was closing in on me, devouring me. I walked towards the bed and lied down. Tears were falling from my face. The mere thought of being cut open so that a piece of my organ could be taken out away was not only terrifying, but strangely sad. It felt like a violation. And what if I didn't survive? What if I wasn't meant to survive the whole operation? I let numbness take over me. Soon, I fell asleep. I don't know how many hours went by before I woke up, but I didn't wake up on my own. Someone poured water on my hairless head. Just a few drops, but enough to do the trick. It was the same girl. You know, I am sick too. My mother is a good medical doctor, but not even a new kidney can save me, because I could never live knowing how I survived in the past. Maybe this will finally stop the madness, my mother's madness, Alice said. And with a surprisingly fast movement, a desperate movement, the young Alice cut her throat with some kind of medical piercing instrument. I screamed as I held her, while she bled to death right in front of me. With Alice's corpse right beside me, the room wasn't pure white anymore, but bloody red. Alice's mother, not being able to find her daughter, I assume, eventually came to see if she was there in the small room behind the glass window. When she saw her daughter lying dead, soaked in blood in my arms, the woman just froze. and kept staring at such a dreadful scene. After a long moment, she left the glass room. Eventually, the police arrived, and I was set free. Apparently, Alice's mother called the authorities herself, but she escaped, avoiding being placed under arrest. Where she was now, what kind of thoughts she must be going through, and what she was doing at this moment, I had no idea, and I hope I never get to know. Rest in peace, Alice, and thank you for saving me. I will never forget you.
If you go downtown and make a left at Pappy's Cafe, you'll find yourself in front of a laundromat owned by a small Chinese lady. She has a very funny slogan, so I'm pretty sure you wouldn't miss it. From the laundromat, take another left till you see a bookstore that only sells spiritual and wellness books. Then, 3 buildings away from that, you'll come to see a small building in the middle of 2 huge stores. That building's mine. Subway. Well, technically it isn't actually mine. Not yet, anyway. I've been working there 6 years now, and the owner, Mr. Nick, talks about handing it over to me when he's ready for retirement. And ever since, I've been dreaming about the days when I would be the proud owner of the establishment. I felt like I could finally be able to implement some of my own ideas and make some changes to the place that I felt would greatly increase our customer inflow. I brought them up on countless occasions with Mr. Nick, but you know how old people are, stubborn as hell and allergic to change. Mr. Nick doesn't come in much these days. He's busy spending time with his children and their children, but I still run the business just as he taught me. So you could say I was already the owner of the establishment. I was also the only permanent staff member. The place wasn't too large, and we didn't need anyone snooping around like a lost mouse. So I only hired the help necessary for the business. And that meant keeping only 4 people at max. They were all temporary, with lots of shifts to prevent them from staying too long on the property. Their employment was not too long either. They would be employed for a little over a month, and when they were getting comfortable enough with everything and they would soon be in the mood to ask questions, I fired them. Our Subway store had immense potential, but Mr. Nick decided to keep it low-key. It's much easier to stay hidden and easier to manage that way. And you might be wondering why we were so secretive, but that was only due to our business ethics. It may be seen as horrific by some and downright nasty and disgusting to others, but that was how the company was run and how I was taught to run it. It's not like we're criminals or anything. We just prefer to take laws into our own hands. Our place had been robbed quite a few times in the past. I'm quite certain that I've had more guns pointed in my face than most police officers. I'd been in front of a barrel of a gun more times than I would like. Luckily, Mr. Nick taught me how to handle such scenarios, and I have never gotten shot or beaten up. I would calmly open the register and allow them to take as much as they wanted, which was usually all of it. But it was never the whole profit from sales that day, only a quarter. We usually hid the rest away because it was better if they found a quarter-full register than an empty one. We were robbed, but we never incurred any losses. But what our customers didn't know, and which was probably against the law, was that we had hidden cameras all around the premises. The cameras would tell us how the robber or robbers looked, and we wouldn't press any charges. We had our own ways of finding them, and we would track them down and get back our pound of flesh, which was usually more than a pound. And that was how we never incurred losses, but always made profits. The robbers weren't the only terrible folks who came to our fine establishment to constitute a nuisance. Some thought it was funny to come and eat quality sandwiches and run off without paying a dime. Just goes to show how people take advantage of good things. Here at Subway, we made our customers feel at ease, so we allowed them to eat and savor their meals before paying. And because of the small number of staff, some customers would run without paying. But as I said earlier, we had cameras everywhere that help us find these swindlers. I specifically remember this particular customer. Really hard to forget him, since the profit we made off of him was astronomical. He was a really large man, and permit me to say fat. He was a really fat fella. And he racked up a gigantic $117.50 bill. I checked the cameras, had a picture of him developed, and used the tricks Mr. Nick taught me to track him down. I found his address 2 days later, and one night, I decided to pay him a visit. He was a real slob, if I should say, and his apartment stank. I managed to pick his lock and found him asleep on his bed. He was so large that I couldn't tell which parts were a mattress and which parts were the man. I then incapacitated him with chloroform, but the difficult part was hauling him to my van outside. I managed the seemingly impossible task somehow. I strapped him on the floor, got my special apron, and waited for him to wake up. He woke up a few minutes later, looking frightened and ready to pee in his pants. "Do you know where you are?" I asked him. "Please, I didn't do anything," he blubbered. "Do you know where you are?" I asked him. "No," he said, finally. "Remember, it's the place you ate and failed to make payment," I said, presenting him with the bill. He paled when he saw the bill, and a wet patch formed on his sweatpants. He probably did it a lot. I'm sorry, I'll pay," he blubbered. "It's too late for that, Barry," I said, shaking my head. I went to the corner of the room and pulled off a cloth, covering a table to reveal a table of cutting equipment, and picked up a circular saw. What's that for?" he asked, frightened as I turned it on. The whirring sound was deafening, but never carried through the soundproof walls. "You're about to repay your debt," I said as I put on a face shield. "I'll pay you, please, I'm sorry," he begged. "You will. This is your pound of flesh. Or in your case, 300 pounds, I said, as I pressed the spinning blade to his arm. He screamed and blood splattered everywhere. I didn't stop till he was nothing more than chunks of meat and bones. From a loss of $117.50, we would be able to save over $1,000. If you go downtown and make a left at Pappy's Cafe, you'll find yourself in front of a laundromat owned by a small Chinese lady. She has a very funny slogan, so I'm pretty sure you wouldn't miss it. From the laundromat, take another left till you see a bookstore that only sells spiritual and wellness books. Then, 3 buildings away from that, you'll come to a small building in the middle of 2 huge stores. There's a sandwich store there called Subway that makes the world's best sandwiches. Our customer service is second to none, and you are guaranteed one heck of a good time. But we only have one rule which we take seriously. Don't steal from us.
The flickering sign was the first sign that something wasn't right. The fact that Foot Locker was the only store open by this time was the second. The fact that the store clerk was absent from the front counter was the third. But my boyfriend had a game tomorrow. And after our 12-hour flight landed, we discovered that the duffel bag filled with all his sports stuff accidentally got on another flight, and we had no other choice. He could have just told his sponsors about it and saved us the stress of renting a car and driving around this strange city at night. But he always wanted to exceed expectations, and he thought asking for help was a sign of weakness. So here we were in this store, waiting to see if the store clerk would appear. I bounced on the balls of my feet as I buried my hands deeper into the pockets of my jacket. It was freezing in here. "Maybe we should just get the cleats and drop like a $500 on the counter or something," I offered, and he looked over at me from where he stood next to a display of jerseys. He asked if it was legal, and I told him that since we weren't stealing, it'd be fine. He thought about it for a moment before casting his gaze toward the aisles in front of us. Some of them were plunged in darkness, and I assumed the store was in the process of closing before the clerk went wherever he was. As we walked past the lit up aisles, I realized that we didn't even know where to start. There were signs, but they were only useful if you knew the sequence. We came across quite a handful of sports gear, none of them belonging to soccer. My boyfriend eyed a pair of Jordans as we walked briskly past the basketball section, and just as I was about to make fun of him to lighten the tense mood, I heard a weird thump from somewhere deep in the store. "Do you think it's the store clerk?" I asked, glancing over my shoulder, but my boyfriend only shrugged. "What if he wants to close up and doesn't know we're back here?" At the sound of that, he hesitantly looked behind him and called out to anyone if they were there. He did it twice, but got no response. He shrugged again as he turned back to me. With my hands buried in my jacket pockets and his by his sides, we hurried further into the store. We finally spotted the sign for soccer and quickened our steps. It was in the dark part of the store, but light from the other aisles illuminated it enough for us to find our way around. I heard that thump again. This time it was closer than before, and a weird kind of cold pierced through my back. The distant jangling of keys reached my ears, sounding like it was coming from the counter, and my boyfriend shared a look with me. I asked if we should go back, and he merely shrugged. I scoffed, but turned around anyway. Arguing was pointless. I was cold and tired, and this was just a waste of time. I could be curled up in a soft bed somewhere. I turned on my flashlight as I went, shivering and paranoid. My footsteps echoed against the floors, like the building wanted me to hear how loud I was, and I tried to slow things down. Another sudden jump in the quiet had me nearly jumping out of my skin. I spun in the direction of the sound, wondering if my boyfriend heard it too. For good measure, I called out to him, but he didn't respond. I drew in a big breath and continued my journey, positive that there was no way I could get lost in this enclosed space. Eventually, I'd find my way out. I just hope I did it before the clerk locked us in. Fluorescent lights hummed in the distance, like they'd suddenly come alive, and I looked up briefly before going on my way. The store got quieter and quieter the further I went, and I kept myself grounded by thinking sunny thoughts. I was just about to round another shelf when I noticed it. Smeared on the shiny floors was something red, and on a closer look, it looked like blood. My steps slowed against their will as I moved around the shelf, and the moment I could see the source of the stain. A piercing scream escaped my lips. Immediately, I heard my name being called from far away. Lying on the floor, in khaki pants and a ripped shirt, was a young man. His dark hair lazily draped over his face, and a puddle of blood formed beneath him, dripping out his exposed midsection like a gruesome fountain. His organs had been splayed out, like an animal hit by a car in an accident, but I knew this wasn't an accident. There was something about the purposeful tear of his shirt that told me so. The smell of blood and rot clung into the air, and my feet started moving backwards like they had a mind of their own. The only thing on my mind was to get away, any way I could. I heard my name being called again, but I couldn't focus, the sound of my breathing filling my head and blocking out every other thought except run. Without thinking twice about it, I turned on my heels and headed back the direction I came. I needed to get back to my boyfriend. I needed to get out of here. He called out to me again, and I called back, tracing the sound of his voice until we nearly slammed into each other. Immediately, he took hold of my shoulders. "What's wrong?" I heard you scream. I could barely speak, but I managed to choke it out. We need to get out of here now." As I tugged on him in impulse in the opposite direction, he resisted, wanted to know what was really going on. I didn't have time for explanations, so I tugged harder. We'd barely gotten anywhere when the figure appeared down the aisle, a machete in one hand. I screamed so loud that I wondered how the world didn't hear me. My boyfriend yelled to me to run, and I didn't have to be told twice. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me, my boyfriend behind me. There was a third set of legs running behind us. I dared not to look back. I knew that was a bad idea. We ran out of the store. I didn't know how my body was still functioning. We hurriedly got into the car, and I screamed at my boyfriend to drive. He started the car and turned on the headlights. A loud scream came out of both of us as the headlights illuminated the man with the machete. He raised his machete, and my boyfriend floored the car, running him over. I dug out my phone and dialed for the cops. I gave them the address of the store and made myself anonymous. The next morning, after a fitful sleep, my boyfriend and I woke up to see the news of the machete guy in the headlines. He was called the Slasher and had been killing many people. My boyfriend and I said nothing about it, just grateful that we were both all right.